They say the desert never forgets. It remembers every drop of rain it never got, and every soul it ever took. Somewhere out there, a woman named Nora Quinn found a dying boy by her windmill. And by saving him, she made the desert remember mercy. The New Mexico sun beat down like a hammer on the cracked plains west of Las Cruces. Nora Quinn worked alone along her fence line, sweat running through the dust on her arms, the creak of her old windmill marking time in the silence. She wasn't looking for company, just another day to survive. But in the corner of her eye, something moved. A small figure wavered in the heat like a mirage, stumbling toward her water trough. At first, she thought it was a coyote. Then it straightened and became a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9, maybe 10, clothes in rags, skin burned by the sun, lips split and dry. He staggered toward the windmill, collapsing at its base. Nora dropped her tools and went to him. His eyes rolled back, but his hands still clutched the ground like he was afraid the earth might leave him behind. She poured water from her canteen into a tin cup and held it to his mouth. He drank slow, cautious, like he remembered manners even at the edge of dying. The boy tried to speak, half in Spanish, half in broken English. Words tumbled out. Lost, storm, hungry. His name, she learned, was Tevo. He pointed to the horizon where the rail line shimmered like a snake of silver. She recognized the cut of his clothes then, gray canvas trimmed with nickel buttons. That wasn't ranch wear. That was Thorne's syndicate issue, the uniform of men who laid tracks and broke the land for profit. Nora's stomach turned. The Thornes owned half the desert, and the law that came with it. The smart thing would be to leave him, let the company collect its lost stray. But there was something in his eyes, some fragile, desperate hope that she hadn't seen in years. She lifted him, bones light as fence wire, and carried him into her cabin. Inside smelled of wood smoke and iron stew. She sat him in her only good chair and ladled beans into a bowl. He ate in silence, each spoonful slow and careful, as if afraid it would vanish. When he finished, she noticed the glint at his throat, a small round pendant of polished nickel etched with a thorn spire. Her heart clenched. She had seen that mark once before on a payroll ledger in town, the seal of Silas Thorne, the rail baron himself. The boy wasn't company labor. He was company blood. Nora leaned against the doorframe, every nerve awake. Out here, helping a lost drifter was charity. Helping a Thorne heir could be a death sentence. Yet when she looked at the child sleeping in her chair, all she saw was exhaustion and trust. Outside, the wind shifted. From far off came the metallic echo of hooves on dry rock, a rhythm that didn't belong to cattle. Riders, maybe 10 miles out. Maybe less. Nora exhaled, feeling the storm that wasn't in the sky yet but already gathering over her life. By the time the sun began to slip behind the mesas, Nora's pulse hadn't slowed. The boy slept, wrapped in her old wool blanket, his breathing soft and uneven. Outside, the desert had gone still, the kind of still that made you feel watched. She stood in the doorway, rubbing the sweat from her neck, watching dust lift on the horizon. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, hoofbeats. 3 riders approached, their silhouettes long and sharp in the dying light. Nora recognized them before they even stopped. Cal Redding, her north neighbor, big as a bull and twice as stubborn. Deputy Alma Ruiz, young but sharp, the only law in 50 miles with a conscience left. And behind them, Reverend Hale, his black coat snapping in the wind like a crow's wing. They pulled up at her fence, horses foaming from a hard ride. Cal's face was red with heat and anger. "Quinn," he barked, "you seen anything strange out here? Thorne men been riding all day, looking for a missing boy. Whole deserts crawling with them. Nora's mouth went dry. She wiped her hands on her trousers, buying time. Strange, she said slowly. Stranger than usual? Deputy Rees leaned forward in her saddle. Wire from town says Silas Thorne's grandson wandered off during last night's sandstorm. He's offering a bounty for anyone who brings him back. Dead or alive, the notice didn't say which. Her eyes narrowed. You sure you haven't seen him? Nora looked from one face to the next. The Reverend's expression was different. No suspicion, just sorrow. A child, he murmured, isn't something a body loses without God noticing. She wanted to lie, to send them on their way, to keep the little piece she had left. But the boy stirred behind her, a soft cough from inside the cabin that sounded far too human. Cal's eyes flicked toward the noise. What's that? He asked. Nora exhaled through her teeth. He's inside, she said finally. Found him near the windmill this morning, half dead. I couldn't leave him out there. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The desert wind filled the space between them. Then Cal swore under his breath and kicked the dirt. You got no idea what you just did, he said. They'll think you took him. Thorne's men don't knock, they burn. Rees's gaze softened. I'll give you a chance, Nora. Get him to the San Miguel mission by dawn. Father Cardenas will take him in, and the company won't dare touch church ground. But if Pike rides before you get there, God help you. The marshals with them? Nora asked. Rees nodded. Avery Pike himself. If Thorne sent him, it means this isn't just a search. It's a purge. The riders turned back toward the trail, their horses vanishing into the violet dusk. Nora stood in the doorway until the dust settled again. Inside, the boy slept on, unaware of the world tightening its grip around them. She sat by the stove, staring into the dying fire. Every path she could take ended in someone else's shadow. Law, land, or blood. Out beyond the ranch. Night came without stars, as if the sky itself had hidden its eyes. The window creaked once, twice, then went still. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to coals, and the boy, Tavo, sat awake, his dark eyes reflecting the embers. Nora had tried to sleep, but the sound of the wind kept shifting, turning sharp and metallic, like spurs dragging across gravel. She rose and poured a little water into a tin cup, watching her own hand tremble. The stillness of the land felt wrong, too clean, too hollow. The kind of quiet that came before men or death. Then, faintly, from far out across the flats, came the signal she'd been dreading. 3 short flashes, then 2. Lantern code. Company riders. Tavo was already standing. He pointed through the window, his small fingers shaking. In the distance, 2 more lights answered the first, blinking in perfect rhythm. He looked up at Nora and whispered one word she didn't need translated: riders. She snatched her rifle from the wall and checked the chamber. The metal was warm from the day's heat, the stock smooth and familiar. We're not waiting for them, she said. If we can reach the arroyo before dawn, we might still have a chance. But Tavo didn't move. He stared out the window again, face gone pale. Many, he said quietly. Too many. He began counting with his hands, 10, 20, 30, until Nora stopped him. Enough, she whispered. But he kept going, eyes wide with fear. 50. 100. 200. Nora's stomach turned to stone. The Thorne Syndicate hadn't sent a search party. They'd sent a small army. She blew out the lamp and opened the door a crack. The air outside was thick with dust and moonlight. Shapes were moving in the dark, men on horseback, riding in long, disciplined lines, their lanterns covered so only the faintest glow leaked through. From the way they rode, it wasn't a search. It was a siege. Tavo tugged at her sleeve, frantic, gesturing toward himself and then to the open land beyond the fence. He wanted to go out there, to show them he was alive, that she wasn't a kidnapper. Nora shook her head. "They'll shoot before they listen," she said. "You stay here." But already the sound of hooves was closing in. The first riders emerged from the shadows, dusty coats, broad hats, rifles at their sides. And leading them, his face half lit by a shielded lantern, was Marshal Avery Pike. Nora had heard of Pike all her life. The man who'd hanged 6 miners for breaking Thorn contracts. The man who smiled while he did it. He sat his horse perfectly still, scanning the cabin through the dark. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and cold. "Nora Quinn," he called. "We know you have what belongs to us. Send the boy out, and maybe you'll see the sunrise." Teva whimpered, clutching her coat. Nora's jaw locked. "He's not yours," she said under her breath. She knew Pike couldn't hear her, but she wanted the desert to. The riders spread in a wide arc, forming a glowing horseshoe that. Dawn crept slow and blood-red over the mesas, the kind of sunrise that made the world look half-burned. The syndicate riders were still there, a perfect circle around Nora's ranch, 200 men on restless horses, their breath fogging in the chill. In the center sat Marshal Avery Pike, coat draped over one shoulder, eyes cold as tin. Nora hadn't slept. She stood on the porch with her rifle across her arms, her hair pulled back tight, jaw set hard enough to break a tooth. Tavo sat just inside the door, watching the window like a caged bird. When Pike finally spoke, it was with the patience of a man used to being obeyed. "Ms. Quinn," he called, voice smooth and steady. "You've had your night. Time to come to terms with daylight." Nora didn't answer. The windmill creaked once behind her, like the desert holding its breath. Pike waited, then nudged his horse forward until he stood within 30 paces of her porch. "You took what isn't yours," he said. "You think good intentions make you righteous? The Thorn Syndicate doesn't deal in intentions. It deals in property, and you're sitting on theirs." She lowered the rifle slightly, enough to make it clear she wasn't about to fire, but not enough to look afraid. "He's not property," she said. "He's a boy. Lost, scared, half dead. I gave him water. That's all." The marshal's pale eyes narrowed. "You gave him a night's shelter, and now you're part of the story. The Syndicate writes its own endings, Ms. Quinn. They don't need facts." She swallowed hard, feeling the dryness in her throat. Then maybe they need truth for once. A slow grin spread across Pike's face, humorless and sharp. "Truth?" he said softly. "Truth is whatever Silas Thorne says it is. You're trespassing on his land. You found his blood and didn't return it. That's theft, neglect, maybe even rebellion. All three hang the same way." Behind him, the riders shifted. Saddles creaked. Spurs chimed. The air thickened with waiting violence. Tavo moved to her side, tugging at her sleeve. His lips formed one word: church. She understood immediately. Alma Ruiz had said it, San Miguel Mission. Holy ground, untouchable. Maybe still their only chance. Nora looked back at Pike, squinting against the glare. "You want him?" she called. "Then you'll get him at the mission. Father Cardenas will hand him over. You can witness it yourself." Pike raised one brow. You think you get to dictate the terms? I think you care too much about appearances to shoot a woman in front of your men before breakfast, she said. And I think you know the syndicate likes to keep its hands clean in the papers. That landed. The smirk faded, replaced by calculation. Pike studied her for a long moment, the wind pulling at his coat. Finally, he nodded once. Dawn tomorrow. Mission bell. If you're not there with the boy, I'll come back and make your ranch a memory. He turned his horse sharply, signaling the others. The circle broke, riders peeling away in every direction. The horizon was already glowing when Nora cinched the last strap on the saddle. The desert was a sheet of red dust and silence. Tavo stood beside her, clutching a small canteen almost as big as his arm. He looked up at her like he was trying to measure how scared he should be. Stay close, she said. Don't talk unless you have to. If you fall, you get back up before I turn around. He nodded, solemn as a soldier. They left the ranch behind, the windmill shrinking into a black spike against the sunrise. Every hoofbeat sounded too loud, every shadow too long. The air smelled of iron and heat, though the day was barely born. By mid-morning, they were miles deep into open land, nothing but scrub, sand, and memory. Nora knew the mission lay east, beyond a dry arroyo and a strip of canyon where the land folded like an old scar. It would take most of a day to reach it if luck stayed with them. But luck had never ridden with her for long. Around noon, she spotted the first sign that Pike's men were close. A dust trail, thin but deliberate, cutting across the flats to the south. She pulled her horse behind a ridge and motioned for Tavo to slide down. They crouched in the brush while the riders passed, a half dozen of them, dark coats flapping, rifles across their saddles. They didn't speak, didn't shout. They just rode. Methodical. Patient. When they were gone, Tavo whispered, They follow? Not yet, she said. But they will. They remounted and pressed on, the heat slamming down like a fist. The world shimmered, edges blurring. Tavo swayed in the saddle, half asleep. Nora reached over and steadied him with a hand. You stay with me, kid, she murmured. We make that mission, we live. That's the deal. Hours later, the wind picked up, hot and dry, full of grit. It bit at their faces and filled the air with a low hum. The desert had gone strange. In the distance, the sky bent in a wave of brown. Sandstorm, Nora muttered. She pulled her scarf over her face, leaned forward, and kicked her horse harder. The storm rolled toward them, swallowing the horizon in a wall of dust. Visibility dropped to nothing. The air became choking, thick, alive. She could barely hear Tavo shouting behind her, his small voice lost in the roar. Then the ground gave way. Her horse stumbled down a slope, sliding into a shallow ravine that curved like a claw. She pulled the reins and dismounted, dragging Tavo down with her. They pressed against the rock as the wind screamed overhead. For an hour, or maybe more, the storm raged. Dust hissed through every crack, painting them in red. Nora wrapped her coat around the boy, shielding his face. He trembled but didn't cry. When the wind finally eased, the world was unrecognizable. The ridge they'd come from was gone, erased by the storm's hand. Nora climbed to the top of the ravine and looked east. Through the thinning haze, she saw something glint, metal, movement, life. The white spire of San Miguel Mission, miles away, rising. By the time the sun began to fall, the desert had turned the color of rust. The worst of the sandstorm had passed, but the air still shimmered with dust, each breath dry as gunpowder. Nora's horse limped, its flanks streaked with sweat. Tevo sat slumped in front of her, head against her chest, barely awake. They rode into the canyon as the light dimmed. The walls rose high on both sides, striped red and black, closing them in like the ribs of some buried beast. The air was cooler here, but not safer. Sound carried strangely, bouncing off stone. Every hoofbeat came back doubled, echoing like ghosts. Nora stopped when she saw it, hoofprints fresh in the dust, deep and sharp. Pike's men had passed this way not long ago. She slid off the saddle, boots crunching on gravel, and pressed a hand against the tracks. Still warm. Quiet now, she whispered. Tevo nodded, clutching the canteen to his chest. His eyes darted to the shadows dancing across the canyon wall. They come? He asked softly. They might be waiting, she said. And waiting's worse than coming. They moved slow, keeping close to the rock. The last of the daylight faded into a burnt orange glow, and then the canyon swallowed the sun entirely. They were halfway through when the sound reached them, metal sliding against leather. Nora froze. A voice came out of the dark, smooth and easy. Evening, ma'am. Long way from home, aren't you? She turned, rifle raised. A man stepped out from behind a boulder, hands spread in mock peace. His duster was black, his hat tilted low, the thorn badge glinting at his chest. Regulator. Don't do that, he said mildly. Pike said we could bring you in alive if we could. I'd prefer it that way. Saves everyone the cleanup. Nora steadied the rifle. You get one chance to walk away. He smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Lady, I've been walking for 3 days to find you. I'm not going anywhere without that boy. Tevo shrank behind her. The man's hand drifted toward his revolver. Nora fired first. The shot cracked through the canyon, echoing again and again until it sounded like an army. The regulator dropped hard, dust rising around him. His gun went off wild, the bullet sparking off stone. The echo faded, leaving only the ringing in her ears and the boy's quick, shallow breathing. Come on, she said. We move. They stepped over the fallen man. His badge glinted in the last smear of sunlight, half buried in the sand. Nora didn't look back. The canyon narrowed ahead, forcing them to dismount and lead the horse by the reins. The animal trembled, sensing death still thick in the air. Tevo stumbled beside her, his small hand gripping hers like a lifeline. By the time they reached open ground, the first stars were out. The wind had died completely. The world felt too quiet again, too expectant. Nora looked east and saw the mission spire glowing faintly in the dark, maybe 2 hours' ride away. Hope flickered, small but stubborn. By dawn, the desert bled pale gold. The storm had left the land raw and stripped, every cactus coated in red dust, every shadow long as a rifle barrel. Nora's eyes burned from the grit, but she didn't stop. The white spire of San Miguel Mission finally rose from the horizon like a promise she was half afraid to believe. Tevo rode in front of her, his small frame swaying with each jolt. His lips were cracked, his voice barely more than a whisper. We made it. Almost, she said. Keep your eyes open. The road to the mission was a thin trail of dry clay winding through mesquite. Bells hung silent in the tower ahead, glinting dull in the first light. For a moment she let herself hope Pike had believed her, let herself imagine the syndicate had gone home. Then the wind shifted. Smoke, gun oil, sweat. Her heart sank. Shapes moved behind the mission wall. Horses, men, the flash of a lantern shielded from the sun. The Thorn Syndicate had beaten her there. Nora slid off the horse, pulling Tavo down with her. "Stay low," she whispered. "Run if I say." They crept through the sage toward the chapel's side gate. The adobe wall was cool under her palm, pitted and worn smooth by 100 desert winds. She risked a glance around the corner. Marshal Avery Pike sat on the mission steps, hat in his hands, posture patient as a man waiting for a sermon to end. Around him, riders lounged with rifles balanced across their knees. The bells above hadn't yet rung, but their meaning was already written in the dust: judgment. Nora exhaled slowly. "He's early," she muttered. From inside the chapel came the murmur of voices. Then Father Cardenas stepped into the sunlight, gray hair tied back, face creased but kind. Pike rose to meet him. "You said she'd come," the marshal said. "She will," the priest answered. "And when she does, you'll show mercy." Pike's smile was thin. "Mercy's not mine to show, Father. It's Mr. Thorne's." Nora felt Tavo's hand tighten around hers. "We can't hide," he whispered. "No," she said. "We can't." She walked out from behind the wall, rifle slung low, dust streaking her face. Every man there turned. Pike's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Respect, surprise, maybe both. "Morning, Marshal," she said. "You said dawn? I'm punctual." Pike gestured lazily toward the boy. "And the package?" Tavo stepped forward, chin high despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm not a package," he said in a voice too small for the empty plane. The marshal studied him. "You're Thorn blood, son. You belong to him." Tavo shook his head. "I belong to me." The priest crossed himself. A few riders muttered uneasy. Even Pike seemed to measure his next words. "You've caused a great deal of trouble, Miss Quinn," he said at last. "Men dead. Property lost. You ready to pay for that?" Nora glanced at the chapel doors behind him. "Depends what you think payment looks like." Before he could answer, a sound cut through the stillness, the sharp clang of metal. The second bell of San Miguel rolled through the canyon like thunder. For a breath, no one moved. Pike's riders froze with hands half-drawn, the horses snorting steam into the cold morning air. Dust drifted through the sunbeams, turning gold, turning holy. Then Pike said softly, "Enough of this." The first shot cracked from somewhere in the circle. The sound tore the silence in two. A bullet slammed into the mission wall. Pieces of adobe burst into the air. Tavo cried out and dropped to the ground as Nora spun, rifle in her hands. She fired back, not to kill, but to make them flinch. "Inside!" she shouted. Father Cardenas pulled the boy through the chapel door as bullets chewed the plaster around them. Nora followed, shoving the heavy oak closed. The echoes of gunfire turned the sanctuary into a drum. Candles shook on the altar. Pike's voice carried through the thick wood. "Don't make this worse, Quinn. You're surrounded. Walk out, and I'll tell Thorne you died clean." Nora pressed her back to the door. "I don't need him to write my story." The priest laid a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Child, this is sacred ground. He won't cross it." Outside, the riders formed ranks. But even Pike hesitated. Shooting a woman and a priest beneath the cross was bad for the syndicate's image. He signaled instead, and the men dismounted, setting torches to the mesquite fence around the yard. Smoke began to curl over the wall. Inside, the boy coughed. "He'll burn us." "Not if the sky gets there first," Nora said. She stepped to the doorway, slammed the butt of her rifle against the latch. and fired once into the air through the bell tower window. The bullet shattered glass, and something changed. A wind rose out of nowhere, a hard, wet wind that smelled of iron and life. Then came the first drop. Then 1,000 more. Rain hammered the desert, sudden and furious. The torches hissed out one by one. The riders cursed and stumbled in the mud. The mission bells swung wild in the gust, their bronze throats roaring over gunfire and fear alike. Pike looked up, water streaming down his face, coat plastered to his chest. For the first time, his calm cracked. "Damn you, Quinn," he said quietly, almost admiringly. "You brought the storm." Nora pushed the chapel door open and stepped into the rain. She didn't raise her rifle. She just stood there, soaked, the boy beside her and the priest behind. "Go home, Marshal," she called. "Tell Thorne the desert finally said no." Pike stared for a long moment, then turned his horse. "This isn't over," he said, and rode into the gray. The others followed, fading into sheets of water. When they were gone, the storm softened. The ground drank greedily. The air smelled clean for the first time in years. Tavo tilted his face up, laughing through the rain. Nora let the rifle drop to the mud. Her knees went weak, but her heart felt strangely steady. The bells rang slower now, calmer, carrying across miles of wet earth. Shiloh.